Welcome to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth, and we're here to preserve and promote culture, one weekly conversation at a time. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show through iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Google Play, and a whole bunch of other venues. Just visit our sites, chimeraobscura.com/VM or vmspod.com to find more information, along with our RSS feed. And follow the show on Twitter and Instagram at VMSPod. Well, I made it back alive from Rotterdam and Amsterdam. It was a uneventful landing at Newark Airport on Mother's Day. I'll say the plane did seem to bank a little steeply, a little close to the landing for a 777 Boeing, but I also later found out there was a ground stop in place because of another radio problem with air traffic control. But I guess maybe that made the approach easier since there were no planes outbound. Still, I kept my fingers crossed until we were at the gate, hoping we weren't going to, bump into another plane that was taxiing or any other weird air traffic issues in the Newark airspace. Anyway, it was a good trip, but it was a lot. I mean, it feels like 3 weeks since I posted the last episode, even though that was just like 8 days ago. I had a ton of business conversations during the trade show in Rotterdam, and when we were off duty, I had this huge Department of Commerce submission I had to get done with all my members chiming in with changes and edits. And anyway, I got that done on time. And then I shifted gears into like tourist flaneur mode in Amsterdam after finishing the show in Rotterdam, I guess Friday morning. And I just kind of meandered through the museum quarter and found some great bookstores at the city center on my first day. And then I got to the Anselm Kiefer exhibition at the Van Gogh and Stedelijk museums on day 2. I wrote about that in the newsletter on Sunday, along with having lunch with a past podcast, Julie Phillips. She was a member of the Rijksmuseum, so she got the two of us in. We had lunch there, and then she just let me loose to go run around the Rijksmuseum that afternoon. It was really good. You should go check out my episode with Julie back in 2022 and definitely go get her book, The Baby on the Fire Escape, which is about great artists and how they balance their art with motherhood or fail to balance it. Anyway, it was kind of neat to talk about that stuff the day before Mother's Day in the U.S. But it was weird being on my own, like post-work, once the trade show was done and people left me alone in the hotel breakfast on Friday. They did not leave me alone. They kept coming up to me and talking. I just wanted to have my fucking breakfast and then go to Amsterdam. But anyway, after that, I really haven't had myself to myself for a while, if you know what I mean. I mean, meditation's done wonders for me this year, but those are like 15-minute spans, usually at home. And I guess I sort of needed the time and space Friday and Saturday. I was glad to just kind of explore unfamiliar territory, explore myself and my stillness in that territory. It was something. I kind of felt change coming on this whole week, like climacteric, like John Crowley wrote about in the Egypt books, a sort of a new seeing, if you get me. Wendung, that's what Rilke calls it in the poem Turning Point, a poem this girl pinned to my dorm room door back in college. Anyway, now we're back. I went into Monday morning with this sort of serenity and bliss and wrote a couple of pieces for my book. And And then by the afternoon, that kind of gave way to anxiety and dread and some other work stuff. But I'm working on it. It's all a balancing act, I guess. But in the meantime, let's get to the new episode, which is only 8 days after the last one, even if it feels like 3 weeks, as I said. My guest this time is Peter Kuper, who has been on several times before. He has an amazing new graphic novel out now from Norton, Insectopolis. The first time Peter was on, it was like almost 10 years ago, late 2015, and that was for his graphic novel Ruins, which was centered on the migration of monarch butterflies and tells a story of sort of entomologist in Mexico. With Insectopolis, Peter brings us an inventive and beautiful journey through the history of insects and the entomologists who studied them and brought them to us, and all the cultural aspects that insects have played in human society. So the device of the book is an unspecified event that leads to the disappearance of mankind, we'll say. And what happens when the insects start exploring the New York Public Library, which happened to have an insect exhibition going on just when that disappearance disappeared. It's an absolutely gorgeous book, and it really uses the spaces of the library to incredible effect. And Peter gives the bugs personalities and fun dialogue as they learn how man studied and saw them. And Peter being Peter, there are plenty of comics nods in the book, like Winsor McKay's animation on mosquitoes and Osamu Tezuka's love of insects, overlapping with the stories and discoveries of some, we'll say, lesser known and deliberately forgotten entomologists. The book's just an absolute joy. I mean, every page has just, this just fantastic design without ever losing the storytelling. I mean, everything is eye-catching, but it leads the eye. And Peter's a master storyteller in comics, so that all makes sense. He showed me the pages on his computer when I visited him last fall for the Instax book I'm doing, but seeing it in print is just a revelation. I mean, Insectopolis is a blast to read. It's filled with great art and cartooning, educates the reader about the history of insects and the role they play in keeping the world going. The other thing I should mention is there are these QR codes embedded in the art. They're there. You can sort of see them if you're looking for them. And if you use them, they'll sort of lead you to these audio segments with entomologists who Peter interviewed, along with music from another past guest of mine, David Rothenberg. And we talk about Peter's experience with him during this conversation. Now, alongside Insectopolis, Peter's got a pair of companion books that are out now also, Coloring Insectopolis from Countryman Press, a Norton division, and Monarch's Journey from Self-Made Hero. Both of those are coloring books, and in their way, they extend Insectopolis and Ruins, that book I'd mentioned earlier. But I just got to say, like, Peter's, his activism and progressivism, his devotion to battling climate change, his art, his lifelong love of the insect world, all of that comes together in this project. It is absolutely beautiful to see it, to see what he puts into it and to see the way it all fits for him. The way he manages to tell a story so differently than his past books. Well, anyway, I'm just awfully glad we got together to sit down and talk about it. So go get Insectopolis, as well as those coloring books I mentioned, whether it's for you or the youngins in your life. There's a lot to learn. And Peter brings us a hell of a story, a 400 million year story in the course of this. Now, as caveats go, Peter's mic screwed up. I think it's because we were doing handheld instead of the tripod thing, but whatever the excuse is, his channel came out with all this distortion and fuzz on it, so we had to use my backup recorder for his channel, which means there's just a tiny little bit of echo and flutter on this one. Also, it's New York City, so street noise. Now, here's Peter's bio from the book. Peter Kuper wrote the Eisner Award-winning Ruins and critically acclaimed adaptations of Alice in Wonderland, Heart of Darkness, and Metamorphosis. He founded the political anthology World War III Illustrated, writes and draws Mad Magazine Spy vs. Spy, and taught Harvard University's first class dedicated to graphic novels and comics. And now, the first 2025 Virtual Memories conversation with Peter Kuper. So tell me about the origin of Insectopia.
Topless.
Oh, God damn it.
That's all right.
No, we'll start over. Don't worry. Because I know it had a different name with the...
It had different iterations, and ironic that you should say Insectopolis because...
was that one of the early
because
names?
It was one of the ideas I pitched.
Yeah.
And it took me a while to keep on not saying that because I was like, Insectopia.
It flows.
I actually woke up in the middle of the night and I had the idea, and I have my little notebook, and I wrote that down in my notebook, and woke up in the morning, couldn't remember what I had written down, and I opened my notebook, and I had written right on top of other letters, and I could not read it. And it took about a week for Ugly staring at it like, that was the title, I know it is. And anyway, we were right.
See, I keep...
It was Intersects.
Yeah.
And then I discovered, which was what my exhibition at the library was called, etc. And then it was pointed out that if you Googled Intersects, what the websites it took you to were not
necessarily
it wasn't what I was looking for. Anyway.
So where did Insectopolis begin for you then?
Well, I guess I would say it started when I was 4.
Yeah.
Because I was born in New Jersey, and the cicada brood that came out when I was 4.
The 17 years?
It was their 17 year, and the trees were covered in cicadas, and where a lot of people might run screaming from that, my reaction was to run up to the tree and just go ooh ah.
Yeah.
And I'm completely fascinated, already an entomologist, budding entomologist, enough so that I actually told my dad that's what I wanted to be, and he got me a little placard that was sitting on my desk when I was 6. It said Peter Kuper, entomologist, which is probably the biggest word I'd ever seen.
Right.
And I collected insects, and I love them to death, and I apologize to all the ones that died as I loved them. But at the time, it all seemed so abundant, and that certainly I've changed my perspective on that in many, many folds. But when I saw Spider-Man, then my enthusiasm went from spiders to Spider-Man. Even though spiders aren't insects.
We know, but still. Arachnid, arthropod.
That's right. Let's just in case there's any entomologists listening.
When you were a kid, the distinction wasn't as severe.
It wasn't a distinction. They were just bugs.
Yeah.
And so comics came whooshing in, but then there was sort of a parallel passion where I was still very interested in insects and collected them in one way or another. And so essentially, it's like the Venn diagram between my biggest passions, comics and insects, and I explored that in Ruins with the monarch's journey and what before Ruins was done when living in Mexico, going to the monarch sanctuary and raising monarchs with my daughter, and then we went to the place where the monarchs come by the millions, and which was I had heard about that early on, or I think there was sort of a general where do the monarchs go, and then in 1975. North Americans discovered where they went, and of course, it was known for thousands of years in Mexico.
Yeah, the indigenous folk
understood. It was not shared, probably very wisely, and so that's been percolating as this fascination. And then I got to work that into Ruins. In fact, the main character in Ruins is an entomologist who's lost his job at the Natural History Museum, and so I was dancing around that, and when I thought, after I did Kafkaesque and then Heart of Darkness for Norton, I proposed, there was an article in the New York Times Magazine on the insect apocalypse, and I was like, it rattled me.
This is my thing. Yeah.
This is my thing, but also this is going on. It's clearly going on that insects are disappearing. If you just take a measure of I just don't see that many butterflies anymore, and it was just, and then there was this whole thing about
wonderful
the windshield effect.
Oh yeah.
Like if you're driving along, and I remember driving across country, and it was just
nothing.
Everything was covered in insects, and that's just no longer true.
Yeah.
So I was thinking about that, and I read Silent Spring, Rachel Carson's book, and I thought maybe I'll adapt Silent Spring. Then I read Elizabeth Colbert's Sixth Extinction, and I thought maybe I'll do that. My agent was like, "Man, I don't know, not really." And I was like, I want to do something like Guns, Germs, Steel, but about insects. And I pitched that to the editor. I did some drawings, and I met with my agent and the editor, and the editor just was not particularly enthusiastic about it. He just was like, "Well, Guns, Germs, Steel is a little different," and he's quite an astute editor, but this just didn't ring his bells. And after I'd done Heart of Darkness, the foreword was written by Maya Jasanoff. She wrote a book on Conrad, fantastic book on Conrad, and was teaching at Harvard. And we had crossed paths, and she came to my studio, and I don't know, we were just talking about things, and she said, "You should apply for a Cullman." And I was like, I knew of it because people like Gary Panter and Ben Hellman, Ben Ketcher had gotten it. Also, I had written a letter for Frances Jeter.
Oh,
she got it. I was one of the recommenders, and so I was very familiar. But the deadline was coming up quickly, and I just scrambled. I went down to the library. I wandered around. I got some pointers on like what do you want to tell them that will make them interested in your project, and that is how you'll utilize the library, the different areas of the library. Well, they have Nabokov's original drawings of butterflies and butterfly genitalia. He's got a huge book filled page after page of that, which I certainly looked at. Maria Sibylla Marion's original 1700 hand-colored lithographs. And I just looked at, I was looking up entomologists. I was definitely by the seat of the pants, like, okay, quickly find out.
Yeah, let me just do a greatest hits.
Dam. Yeah, I know he's, knew nothing about him really. Just whoever I could kind of like touch on, I went and asked librarians, and they sent me their collections. And I put all that in my proposal and showed some drawings from ruins. And a miracle of miracles, I got a call in February of 2020 that I had gotten but it's early February.
Yeah. So everything is great.
So I was like, hey, oh my God, I got this. And I mean, I was really stunned because I didn't anticipate this. And I felt like, it's like Pulitzer Prize winning people are getting this. And I was just like, I don't really even fully know. I just said I'm going to do a history of insects, but I don't really know how that's going to unfold.
Yeah.
So then, of course, COVID hits. When it rolls up, they actually canceled, in March, I think, the people who had the Cullman that year. And by the way, the Cullman is 14 scholars get a room in the library in this one area, and you utilize the library's facilities, but you also are supposed to interact with each other. That's a big part of it. Well, so with COVID, they were like, okay, the deal is the library is closed to the public, no interaction whatsoever. You don't even have to come in. And about 4 people, 14, maybe 4 people on any given day were in there. I was like, fuck this shit, I'm coming in every day. And from here I can ride my bicycle. So sure. I was like, I would ride down the remarkable journey through Times Square. I got to see New York in
the Omega Man.
It was a different light, but it was also, I spent a lot of time riding through Central Park. Mm-hmm. And I just was like, well, I just haven't done this. And I'm doing it every single day. And so we get there, but I felt very sad and also definitely overwhelmed by there is the Pulitzer Prize winning poet was there, Hernan Diaz, who the book he was writing was Trust, which won the Pulitzer.
Which a guest earlier this year told me I have to read. I haven't read it yet, and I saw he blurbed your book, and I'm just like, God damn it, I really have to get around to that one. And now I know I have an in, so that's good.
And let's see, Stephen Hahn was there, who was just on the Ezra Klein show, historian. Amazing people. And I read what I could and looked up everybody, New Yorker writers, et cetera. Just fantastic people. And
you're like me doing prep for these shows. You know, you want to have some names to drop and some familiarity.
Yeah, you want to have some familiarity. You know, watch a video. You know, YouTube of them talking. I did that with everybody. Yeah. And which was a good move.
The pronunciation of their names, always important.
Always
you want to hear somebody say their name out loud, so
exactly.
that way, you don't embarrass yourself. Yeah.
So I was nervous enough about this and feeling like I really hadn't formed my project, the insect project, together enough that I was like, I know I'll do, and especially with COVID going on, I'll adapt The Plague, Camus' The Plague. Yeah. And I reached out, leading up to this, I reached out to the estate. They said, well, we want to see what you would do. I did several pages of warm-up, all the character studies, prepared. I contacted the guy at the Cullman and said, look, well, what if I'm doing 2 books? Yeah. So I'm walking in with like a project, so I look decently anyway. Yeah. My wife very wisely just said, just watch what happens, It's like that line from The Untouchables, It's like, don't think, it's a Mamet line, don't think about what might happen, watch what does happen. And when you get there, when you're in that, in an environment like that, I was nervous, but what did happen was I walked into an empty library and felt like crying for the lack of, this is not the way the Cullman Fellowship is supposed to go.
The interaction. And
I'm going to learn some things. And I'm not supposed to have to wear a mask everywhere I go, and getting down there and back, and, and et cetera. And I went to the map room to look up the Monarch's Trail. I thought, maybe you'll have a map of that. And I was waiting for the guy to bring me something. And I was just looking at the map room, and I was just stunned by how beautiful the architecture was. Yeah. And I was like a lightning bolt hit me of, oh, wait a minute, this should take place in the library. And the library is, it's got everything going. One of the things that they didn't open was the Treasures exhibition, which is up now, which is the Treasures of the Library. Yeah. That was they had the glass cases with nothing in them, something taped on there. I was able to get into every location and then photograph everything. So I'm in the Rose Room. Instead of there's somebody with their backpack and computer on the table and crowds of people that would have never...
You just get the space itself and the light and everything.
And then I got to know the various workers there. And so I said to the guard, could I go on the upper level there? And I'm like, yeah, sure, go on here. Here's unlock the door. I get to go on the upper level. So I'm photographing down to get those shots. I'm like, there's a door over here. I open it up. I walked into the roof of the inner workings of the library. I bumped into another guy that worked there, Charles Carter, who I just was, he was at his desk when I got into his area, and I was like, hi, nice to meet you. I'm working at the Cullman. I gave him some little Kafka booklet I had, and it was just friendly. Saw him later, and I said, are there any rooms here that, might be interesting? He said, well, have you been to the basement that goes under Bryant Park? That's where all the books were stored. I'm like, what the fuck? And he took me down there. And I started wandering around. It was like the president's office. I was like, doors ajar. I went in there. I went into his office. I photographed it. It's in my book. Yeah. And in there I discovered there were N.C. Wyeth paintings, the originals from Robin Hood and Treasure Island. Yeah. They have like 13 paintings. And it all sort of started to unfold of what this would be. And then suddenly I'm on this track, and then a guy that I met at a comic convention, a guy named Barrett Klein, who's pretty recently did a book called Insect Epiphany. He was my connector to other entomologists. So I started talking to him and running things by him, and I had ideas, and he was like, "No, don't do that." And I was starting to think about the characters of the insects, and I'll be like, which character is which, some associated thing. Yeah. So it's like they're the soldiers that they're the MAGA or whatever it was. Yeah. Don't ruin insects with that. And I was like, okay, fine. But then he introduced me to a guy named Michael Engel, who was in Kansas, and then we were doing all this on Zoom, and I started to have these remarkable conversations with important entomologists, and then saying like, here's where I'm going. What I discovered is like entomologists are very much like comic fans.
Yeah.
And the parallel is actually really distinct, because the way comics were treated as low art, entomology was treated as low science. Mm-hmm. Like E.O. Wilson was fighting it out with the guy who discovered DNA. And because the guy who discovered DNA, who was also at Harvard along with E.O. Wilson, was like, field study, that's dead. Yeah. It's all going to be in the lab, super dickish, and didn't want E.O. Wilson to hire new people that were going to be doing field study. So there's this instant connection, and also that, you want to talk about insects, how many hours do you have?
Yeah.
and I'm like, please. Yeah. So I just started developing things, and the more I developed, and then I'd send them a drawing, then they got more enthusiastic, and then it's like, it's the bee expert. Let me reach out to Gene Kritsky, who is the cicada expert.
Right.
And every one of them was responsive. And so then I was like, okay, as I'm developing a chapter, can I send you the chapter? I reached out to Erica McAllister, who wrote 2 books on flies in England. She's super hilarious. I had watched her YouTube videos, and I reached out and like, would you look at this? And that went on and on throughout the book. So every chapter could be vetted by a super expert, and that, I was like, I don't want to find out later what I got wrong.
Right.
It's like the nightmare of these kinds of things is that you blow stuff.
You idiot! Their heads are on a hinge, not on a yeah.
And I mean, and it's all that, and I double checked with entomologists, because like Jessica Ware, who's the Odonata, that's dragonfly expert at the American Museum of Natural History, who, by the way, got me into the museum and took me upstairs where they have the rolling walls of cases, let me open up the case, left me up there and said, you can photograph what you want, take out, I like pulled what I needed. And then I was like, really, you're going to just leave me in this room with it? I mean,
she doesn't even know you stole those 3 right there. Exactly. I'm just kidding. Never mind.
Exactly.
You didn't steal anything.
No, I just was like, oh my God, you bump a wing, and that's like a valuable and then at Harvard, I was teaching at Harvard. While I was in this process, I just walked into the entomology area right by the Peabody Museum and said, hi, I'm working on this project, and it was like, oh, come on in. And then
same thing. Like, you want to talk entomology?
Yeah, you want to talk entomology? Like, boom, sure, no problem. And then the head of the department is talking to me. Then she took me into their lab where they have their Nabokov's collection of butterflies, blues, and all that he made discoveries on when he was at Harvard and had donated his collection. And there was one guy that I was like, I'm right now studying the dung beetle / scarab. And then she was like, oh, you don't want to talk to me, you want to talk to that guy, and he turns with a stern eye and he's like, yeah, well, an amazing fantasy number 14. And I was like, oh, you mean the first appearance of Spider-Man? I was like, oh, okay, you want to nerd out?
We can roll on this.
Yeah, we can roll. Well, you roll the dung ball, I'll roll the comics, But I was like, and then, same thing, like fully open door to getting this information. So in general, this just, it started to form, and then I was making guesses at what insects I wanted to cover, what chapter they would land on. And I made each chapter modular, and I literally didn't know what I was going to do on the next page. I'd start a chapter. Part of it was I had to take in the information, and I'm like, oh, okay, I think
it's a very different type of comics that you're for what I'm used to from you. It's a very different mode in which you're working. Not I don't want to say pedagogic mode in a sense.
It's a pedagogic
information,
mode, but also my normal mode for doing all the other books that we've talked about. I have I do a layout for the entire book, map everything out.
I've seen those samples of yours. You've shown me,
And it's 5 stages to do a page, but also I mostly determine what's going to happen in it. With this, there was like so little determination that I was figuring out where the chapters would land as I went along, and I had some idea for how I was going to end the book, which I ended up dropping. And I mean, I even started to draw it up, and then I was like, that was maybe the only thing that I abandoned. But in general, I would say, okay, there's going to be a dragonfly section, so I'm going to do a drawing of a dragonfly flying up the stairs towards the Prometheus painting on the ceiling, right? And so I did that drawing because I wanted to do some drawing. I didn't want to just do tons of research.
Just the research, just the writing. Yeah, that makes sense.
It would bury me.
Yeah.
And I just knew also I'd just like to have a mountain of drawing in front of me. So I back and forth the whole thing. And so then I was slowly producing drawings, and I would tape them up on the wall as I did them. And I could sort of vaguely see things forming. And then, again, just making sort of guesses at where chapters would go. And then when I looked into, I knew I wanted to do something with the history of entomologists. So I would look into an entomologist, and Maria Sibylla Marion, who's a naturalist, came up, looking into Nabokov, and then going to the section where they had his annotated copy of Metamorphosis, which I wished I had seen before I did
your adaptation. Yeah,
it was a long period, and then looking at his drawings, for example, and things like that I was coming upon one thing after another, and that just kept expanding it, which is really was what the Coleman is. The idea it's built on is that you're going to utilize the library's the books and the treasures, and that's part of the discovery, and it did that like in spades, and even
but not meant to be a closed-ended project, something that just starts you on
right. You're not. I mean, there was a few of the people arrived with something so fully developed that they were just going to use a few things from there. I was really I started when I came in there in the first place. I get into my office and feel slightly panicked, and I just I'm just going to draw. I'll draw a beetle a day, and so I was drawing these. That ended up being the beginning of the book, where all these beetles are going towards the library. That was just like straight in pen and ink. I'd look at an image of a beetle and then draw it in there, and then I added the library after the fact, but I just had all these beetles.
I was going to ask, with the drawing, were you doing the library by hand on paper, or were you drawing on computer for that?
It's all pen and ink.
Okay.
But what I did was I photographed everything, and then I arranged it. Like I take my photos, sometimes I would collage in the computer. I'd collage several photos, or I'd take the photo I have and I'd stretch it so it fit what I wanted, or to make adjust the angle in one way or another, and then I would lightbox straight into ink, which meant you can see through the paper, kind of, not tremendously, but enough so that I could get all of the perspective in there,
right.
And then I'd be I wasn't interested in slavishly copying all the design. And, the Beaux-Arts designs in the ceiling of, say, the Rose Room is just mind-blowing.
Yeah.
And
But you could lose yourself.
You could lose yourself in it, but also I get bored with that. I get bored with looking at art that does that. It's like, okay, fine, you've
got it.
You got it. I like the idea of approximating in some areas. Although if you look in the book, it looks like I did that, but I didn't. I could do it. A swirl, and I always was like, that's not exactly right. I'll just fake that part of it, but I have all of the perspective in there. Yeah. And then I was adding insects that from photos or drawings, and I would went to the Natural History Museum, and they have this image of butterflies flying up. They've set it up, actual butterflies. I photographed that in pieces, and then I'd collage that into the image that I would then print out
box and work.
And so then I would have the approximation around. I even played with what does it look like if the background is blue and the insects are colored, just figuring that out. One thing I happily understood early on was, and this was playing off of what I did in Ruins, where I have the monarch butterfly is orange and the background is monochrome blue, and so that if I put all the color in and the insects were in color, your eye would just go, and it's like, congratulations, you managed to replicate this if they were really there. But that's part of moving it into my realm, and not having it be look like, well, congratulations, you've assembled a bunch of photos and then kind of copied them, is like, this is what makes it more art. Something.
It's the art of omission.
Yeah,
that's figuring out what you need. And again, your design eye is phenomenal throughout this. So, kudos. I remember seeing when you were showing me the PDFs last fall. It was one of those. Okay, yeah, he really knows what he's trying to get across, both in terms of the library being a character really within it, and it's captivating to see how you do that interplay of the life, the library, and the speakers, we'll say, the ghosts and other voices that begin to tell the stories.
Precisely, yeah, it's a ghost story in many ways.
And you do have the unspecified end of the world aspect to it near the beginning, which is not a spoiler by any means, but this is a book about the insects afterwards, and sort of their using them to explore what man's role was in figuring out what the natural world meant, which I appreciate. Never quite gets explained, and I'm perfectly fine with that. So
Well, that was the I had an answer to that, and I decided it's way more interesting if you have to guess what the answer is.
Yeah.
And that, it also, giving a solution to that particular puzzle was kind of also taking the air out of the end of the book, where it just, let you breathe and enjoy the insects and be left with thinking about their value, as opposed to like, oh, okay, thanks for bumming me out. Which is, if I had to say, the different points I have things I'm going for, without being messagey, is just recognition of how much the world turns because of insects. I mean, I start with a quote from E.O. Wilson where it's, like if humans were to disappear, the world would return to its natural beauty, and if insects were to disappear, it would collapse into chaos.
Yeah.
And that the extent to which we depend on them, that is invisible in so many ways. Like grocery stores would be empty. Forget coffee, chocolate gone, honey, and just
Boom.
General pollination.
Yeah.
I suppose you could turn to the Black Mirror solution of electronic bees, but that didn't go very well. So, that, and it's like ants and termites aerating soil, all these things done, if flies were not processing, and maggots were not breaking down dead things, there would just be dead things everywhere, and everything would smell. And dung beetles not rolling dung, we'd be knee deep in poop.
Yeah.
So it's all of those aspects of it that are like, and not only are we not like tipping our hat to them, we're like
actively trying to end it,
destroying them, and like DDT comes into the book through Rachel Carson. But the other thing I was trying to do was expose all these different people, the naturalists and entomologists, who have been forgotten for various reasons, like Charles Henry Turner, first African-American entomologist, who basically couldn't find work, taught in high school, and then made all these discoveries completely, like he had to do this with no help whatsoever. Yeah. Literally, with being pushed to one side, and some of the discoveries he made, which were, incredibly important, other entomologists picked up later and were like, "This is amazing," and then went, "Oh, wow, this other guy figured that out in 1923, and I'm doing it in the 50s." Margaret Collins is first African American, who she was like a prodigy at age 14, was in college, and got to have sexism and racism, angles to be harassing her, and nonetheless rose up and head of department and working at the Smithsonian, but by being superhuman, basically. Yeah. And
again, you got to be 5 times better just to be treated like crap.
And that was true with Maria Sibylla Merian in the 1500s. She's doing this exploration, discovering the metamorphosis of insects is actually, it's like all one creature going from egg to butterfly, not separate stages, which is what was believed up until she was figuring this out. And, like the discoveries that she made, 100 years later or 150 years later, Darwin's coming along, going, hey, look at, and it's like she had been on top of a number of those things and had to basically, get past to whatever extent she did. Yeah. But, her work still stands. And in some circles, people like these are known, but in a lot of ways they're not. And what I wanted to shine a spotlight on as many of the people in that area, which, you could say ripples out into all the areas where people have done this kind of work.
Oh, no, this sounds very DEI and woke. I don't know if we're allowed to.
DEI and woke. Yes. Well, I mean, odds are pretty good that my book will get banned in the...
Fingers crossed.
One can only hope, Get that printing press rolling for the banned books.
God. And tell me about the Intersects exhibition you did because we hadn't talked on mic since the exhibition at the New York... Well, talk about the exhibition and how that fed into the book.
Sure. So the same person who I bumped into in the hallway and was just friendly with, and a reminder, being nice, definitely a good way to go.
Yeah. And the conversation in the hallway, the biggest thing we lost during COVID when everybody was on Zoom was
we were
just
standing there with our masks on.
Yeah, and just the accidental meeting of somebody. It's meaningful.
Yeah, really meaningful. And for reasons I can't even remember, I had known that the library had Charles Adams' entire archive. Mm-hmm. And so I kept asking every month. I'd say, can I see the archive? And they're like, no, COVID's on. We're not opening that up now. And I started it in the library in September. Come May, they said, okay, it's now open. And for some reason, I reached out to this guy, Charles Carter, and said, hey, I'm going to go see did you know that the archive was here? And he goes, no, I'd love to see that. So he and I went up there. And so I was a little more connected to him. And fellowship ends in August. In September, I get a call and he's like, I was just in a meeting where they're looking to have an exhibition and I'd seen your work and I put your name forward. So you may get a call. And lo and behold, I was like, wow, okay, that's so unlikely this is going to work. And then I get the call and they're like, we're thinking of having this and we would like to do this. I came in and I looked at the hallway and I'm standing there staring at it. And another guy that I had met casually, I was thinking, okay, I'll have these little frame things on the wall. This is how it'll be arranged. They do beautiful exhibitions there. There's a New Yorker exhibition now. It's just amazing. So all their exhibitions are fantastic. And they had closed down because of COVID. There had been an exhibition that was supposed to go up that didn't make it. So that was part of, I think I probably got a little extra budget because of that. Mm-hmm. So, and this guy randomly walked up to me and he's like, oh, you should make them billboards. You make your art billboard size, because they didn't want to have original art in there because they were doing some construction. Yeah. So it was going to be prints. And it's like, why not make those prints vinyl? And why not, how big can I blow them up? So I photographed the hall, and then in Photoshop, I put my drawings in the space. And I was like, what if I have type on the marble? And you can do that with die cut, stick on type. And it would be really great if I could get them to paint the ceiling and put monarch butterflies up there. And then I'm meeting with their exhibition people, and we're standing there, and there's another hallway that goes to the bathroom. It's a full hallway. And I was like, could I use that hallway too? There was the main exhibition hallway. Don't see why not. It's now, by the way, the New Yorker shows up. That hallway is just white paint. There's nothing in it. But that's where I had I took the monarch drawings that I had from ruins and made that the flow of their migration. So you walk down one, and then the exhibitions guy is like now opening up, and he's like, well, why don't we use even the next hallway beyond that? There's a doorway and there's some things there. And I got to move some of the monarchs, started to move out into the other parts of the library. The only thing they wouldn't let me do is I wanted to have a kind of a scavenger hunt and place monarchs around the library, and you'd have to find all of them. And the head of the library was like, people congregate on the stairs, and this is COVID. Yeah. We can't have that, right? So, and it was just getting to the place where people were starting to come back. And one of the so I got that rolling. While I met with the bookstore to say something about like maybe we could do a postcard for the show, and she said, "Well, is there going to be a brochure?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, brochure."
Yeah, we were just talking about that.
Yeah. And I went up and I met with the exhibition people, and I said, "Could we do a brochure?" And he was like, "How many pages do you want it to be? You want it to be 16 pages?" I'm like, "No, I don't know that we can pull that off in the next month.
Yeah.
But how about more like a fold-out brochure?" And literally at that moment, Charles Carter, the same guy who got this exhibition going, is walking by. I don't even remember how I knew that he had done some recording they had a Frankenstein exhibition, and he had done recording for that. And I was like, hey, what if I was thinking about soundscape, and I'm like, could we do like a targeted sound of the cicada, like if you step under there? And of course, somebody stepped in and was like, it's a library after all. And I was like, but the exhibition head was in fact saying, well, we do have these targeted things, but then the money person was like, no, putting the kibosh on that. And so I was like, well, what if we did some kind of like a QR code, something, and we'll interview entomologists who I've now connected with. And he was like, yeah, I could do that. And we just got rolling, and we did 6 of those. And that included bee expert, cicada expert, dragonfly expert, and I did the interview. In conversation, Charles, was writing some of the scripts and did this great recording, and
you had David Rothenberg's music.
Well, right at the very tail end.
Oh yeah.
He's like, we need some sound for this, and I'm like, oh shit, he's literally, we need it by tomorrow because I'm about to assemble these. Well, I remembered an interview I'd heard with David Rothenberg. And
maybe mine. It was from 2013. I recorded with him for Bike Music.
I definitely listened to that one. But it was something that
didn't have to be that one.
I think it was NPR had interviewed him before. So I looked him up, and I went to his website. I loved yours. It was one of those form things where you go to a website, and I thought, well, I'll never hear from him. And I need to hear from him by tomorrow. I write and say, here's what I'm doing. Next morning, there's a positive response. And he's like, sure, you can use my music for free. Mm-hmm. And also just incidentally, he was like, oh, I wrote this book, Bug Music. I'll send it to you. Sends me his book. I'm like, let me send you Ruins. He gives me his address. He's in Cold Spring, where my wife and I have a place.
Yeah.
He's like, literally 5 minutes from. I'm like, okay, that's really weird. Yeah. So then, when I'm up in Cold Spring that summer, I was like, let's get together, and we meet. And he's like, hey, you want to go out and we'll go to a lake and we'll record the sounds of the lake? And I'm like, fuck yeah. So we go out, with recorders. They're throwing in mics into the lake and recording something. Don't get anything. But while I'm walking back, I've had the exhibition at the library, which it was up for 6 months. And it dawned upon me, God, the QR codes that were in that show, that would be, what if I put them in the book? I mean, like, is that, cool?
Yeah.
And so what I got from our little walk together was, I'm going to get with his music. And he was like, yeah, you can do that. And, I gave him credit and all, but, just really, that kind of, again, the
serendipity of it all. Yeah.
That happens when you're passionate about something and you connect with somebody who has the same passions. It's just really a beautiful thing. Yeah. So to roll it back to the exhibition, so now, okay, I finished the fellowship, the Cullman Fellowship, and I'm starting to form together something that could be a book that I could pitch as a proposal, because now I want to keep doing this.
Yeah.
And so I start to color things. Now, I better start coloring quickly because I had a lot of black and white drawings, but for this exhibition, I'm going to have to start getting stuff together. And so I started furiously coloring, which also incidentally was good for putting together a good proposal, a pitch. And I started drawing things up, some ideas that would be in a book. Some of it was going to make it into the show, an exhibition if it happened, and some of it was good just for the proposal. And then it came right up to the edge where they were going to print the brochure, and Norton has an option on my next book, because I had from having done Heart of Darkness with them. Yeah. And they brought it right up to the very last day, literally the last day of that, their option where I, or I could pitch it to somebody else.
One more day. Yeah.
And my agent was like, if you want to get in the brochure that says courtesy of Norton, when this exhibition goes up, make, fish or cut bait, and so that got that moving forward. So there's a lot of kismet in this process. And then when the exhibition went up, that really helped the editor be like, look
conceptualize what's there and see how it's all.
Conceptualize, and he could literally send people over and go, you want to see this book I'm working on?
Yeah.
Here it is in the hallway. So that was in, say, November, December, that got settled. January, we're starting to hang the show, and it was supposed to open in January, and first it was going to open, they wanted to open for Thanksgiving. That was just ridiculously fast.
Yeah.
Then it was like, okay, Christmas, then, and I wanted that to happen too, because there were crowds at the library, Europeans, if nobody else was showing up. And we started to hang the show. And interesting thing about the library is they do not close the space for doing the show. So people are moving through your space while you're doing that. And we got one wall of, almost 10 walls up. And they announced at the end of the day, Omicron is hitting, the library's closing, and we don't even know if we're going to continue with the show. So I got so I took some pictures out and I thought, this may be it. Yeah. I went home. Next day, I had Omicron, and it lasted for the exact 7 days. And then they were like, "We're opening the library, and we're now going to hang the show." And I had to be there for this hanging. Like, I'm making decisions, even though there was an incredible designer involved. It was a design company.
Yeah, but still, your eye is still
very involved, right? And this is where that's going on, and change up decisions. And my wife, was like, you got to take the COVID test. You can't go down there if unless you're negative. And I was like, but I feel fine. Yeah. And,
don't worry, honey.
And so, there was a lousy 15 minutes waiting for that test to come up. And it, came up negative. I raced down to the library. We hung the whole show. And then the last thing, I'd gotten them to paint the ceiling. But then the last thing was, I need these monarchs put up there. We had to get them. That was the last thing to be printed. And they were like, "We're out of budget," and I was like, "We got to do it." And they were like, "It's just it's too much." But I realized I was being vague, and I hadn't really said, "This is what I need exactly." And so I went home and I was like, "I need 100 monarchs, and this size, and this size, and this size." And they came up with the monarch. I was like, it's supposed to be, the immersive part of it, really.
That you feel you're in that atmosphere, that environment. Yeah.
Yeah. And they went for it, and they really just, it was, all of it felt a little insanely miraculous that it
That's the best kind of art, and the best kind of we'll say immersive. I know it's not, immersive art the way Sleep No More, but it's that environmental sense.
It had in that direction. It could, if I had, if there was more floors you could go to.
Then have people in butterfly costumes walking around.
Precisely, yes. And they printed 100,000 brochures, and they ran out before the end of the show, which is at least, I couldn't ever tell who was seeing and all that up until that moment. But another winning moment was they have a reproduction of the Gutenberg Bible that was up as a display right to one side of my display, and I was like, can we do something about that? Because I really don't. It's just nothing against Gutenberg, but it's just a Bible right in the middle of the show. It's going to just totally look like that's somehow.
It's an intentional placement.
And I got them to build a full wall box around it, and put art over it, and so that it was hidden. And at which point I was informed, everybody hates that display. We're really
thanks for getting it out of the way.
Can we hide it, please?
Wow. Thank you for the description, because I managed to miss the entire 6 months it was there. I kept doing, I'll go in next weekend and I'll go see it. And of course,
it's
I'm an asshole. I never managed to.
Especially during COVID.
Oh yeah, it was one of those juggling and time frame sort of things, and I was like, going into New York could be a little dodgy, but The thing I want to ask, though, I mean, you talked a little about that writing process and the drawing out of sequence, etc. What did the book teach you about making comics? What did you have to learn? Well, let's say, what did it teach you? What did this book really?
Well, that I don't need to go into it with that kind of like fully designed structure.
Yeah.
And that the process of discovery, I think it brought the energy that I was experiencing when I was like having aha moments for like, this is where the Patreon is going to be.
Yeah.
And even like realizing that, oh, this chapter can go into that chapter, or how I even forming chapters and going, oh, I know, I'm going to have, it's
the sort of frontispiece.
So yeah, the frontispiece, each chapter has an object like an ant farm that's like the link between humans and insects.
And the old DDT ad and other things.
The DDT ad or the Egyptian scarab sculpture, or an old, a Japanese beautiful hand done scrim with cicadas on it, and finding those objects, like what's the object going to be, which I then made it as if the concept that formed was, what if the library, the treasures show, which is up there, and does in fact have, say, Nabokov's butterfly drawings, but also has say Virginia Woolf's cane, or incredible pieces from their collection, what if I just pretend like the whole library, each room has been dedicated like that, and so there's display cases around, and then each display case is going to be have this dedication to it, and each room is going to have this dedication, which then made all the rooms that I photographed fit in, and then like, okay, well, what would that room be good for? Why choose that one? That would make sense maybe. And so Nabokov, of course, is in the room where they have his archive, and but the general idea of this is going to be these display cases, and they would then I can
open
work
up into
all these little details, and the insects are going to be looking at their own history that way, and I could kind of like almost run off of what the library was intending to do anyway. And they had a Nabokov display there at one point in this one room, and I was like, can I use the title that you use? So it was a super meta, and the most meta moment of all was I have the monarch butterfly fly into my exhibit that has the monarch butterfly.
Yeah. So do you see that sort of freedom or flexibility in your upcoming work?
I went off of your question.
No. Again, the passion you have for this project, and the fact that even though it's in print, it is long, we'll say, completed. Obviously, this thing is still living with you and inspiring you. So that's to me, that's awesome.
No, now I'm trying to figure out like, how can I get back there? It's like,
that's what I wondered.
I want to figure some angle that isn't that would allow me to explore. It has to be something completely different, and yet tangentially related. I mean, I've ended up doing 2 coloring books that came out simultaneously with this one, called One Coloring Insectopolis, which I thought, I'll just put the pen and ink drawings into that, and I'll just put that together easily. And then, of course, it turned into its own book that has other history about insects and other quotes and other poems. And then I was like, I'm really enjoying it. Part of it was I'm still doing this book then. Yeah. And then I also did one called The Monarch's Journey that's taking the images from ruins as another, it's a coloring book, but really it's just
a narrative.
You could just it's a narrative of the monarch that somebody could just take and keep as is, or choose to color.
Yeah. Or buy 2. Just
I'm sorry.
The freedom of this sort of mode is that infecting your upcoming work?
So that
which is a way of saying, what are you working on now?
Well, actually, since I know that question's coming, and also in order to keep at bay the horror I've been feeling from what's going on politically and environmentally, and pretty much everything.
Yeah, existentially. We'll just say our entire world.
On all counts. This is what I do to keep it at bay: is be as buried as I possibly can either commenting on it through the drawing I'm doing, which is weekly. I do a Charlie Hebdo strip.
Yeah.
So I've been doing that for 5 years, and I realized I have a book's worth of these comics, and they're all about climate change for the most part, and that especially as the Trump administration is saying you can't even say the word climate change and it's X'd it out of everything, and shutting down the EPA, et cetera, it seemed like it would be a good timely book, and I pitched it to Fantagraphics, and I've been working on that. I started working on that along with, I did these coloring books, and then I was simultaneously working on that book, which is called Wish We Weren't Here. Very postcardy, in fact. It's designed to look like a postcard. And I worked with Kayla E., who did Precious Rubbish. And
I think Caitlin McGurk was praising the living heck out of her design also for Caitlin's book on Barbara Sherman.
And she had been in my first Harvard class.
Really?
And she was responsible for me teaching at Harvard because she was working on her thesis, and she was, said to the administration, hey,
I need someone to teach me comics.
I need somebody to teach a comics class.
Yeah.
And so, I've been beholden to her for that.
Wow.
But it was just a beautiful, opportunity to work together while she's doing her own book that's, going gangbusters, which is fantastic. And she's just amazing. So that was that's going to come out in October or November. So I will have, as Insectopolis is settling down in taking over my life as it will, I will move to that, and then that gives me enough sort of breathing room. I'll definitely be. I'm now in a state of I feel like we're all running against the clock. So, and the truth is, I've been doing that my whole life, because when I was say 8, I saw the movie Failsafe about the dropping of the atomic bomb by accident on Moscow, and to prevent World War III, we allow Moscow to bow in one city in this story, and it's New York, where I wanted to move even when I was 8, and so percolating in the back of my head was, I just got to get my first book published before they drop the bomb. I got and that in the late 70s. Cold War full swing, Reagan coming up into office. That was very,
I've tried, not pertinent. In any sort of you kids don't understand way, but I've talked to younger neighbors and such, and they talk about environmental collapse and everything else. I said, it's terrible, and it is, this is going to change the world. You just sort of have to understand, we grew up with the idea that everything was going to disappear instantly, and we'd have no idea why, that we were just going to get nuked, especially being close to New York, that we were just going to get vaporized, and there would be no warning whatsoever. And it kind of embeds itself in the back of your head for the rest of your life.
But I've used that in the positive to motivate me to get things done. And now
it's like George Carol Oates in The Heart Condition. She knows she could die any second, so she just keeps working.
And that's true anyway. It's just sort of like the reminder of it. I had a friend who had an alert on her phone that every 5 times a day it says you're going to die.
Oh, trust me, the leukemia thing really just send me into overdrive. So
100%. So these things are
you can take
your own adventure,
right? You can make a positive out of them.
And it does that for me. I really have to be engaged now. Like as soon as I stop, I'll do a comic.
Yes, I wondered whether there was a
and then
project.
So that was. And I just finished it last week. We just wrapped it up, and it's I'll see proofs on that while I'm prepared, like before this book has even come out. So that's I can say it's lucky me to not be petrified by my sense of doom and gloom that is hovering over these things. And the creating process, it just keeps on. It can't help but spark hope, because it's sort of like in my personal experience, I'm very conscious of how feeling fortunate and get the joy I'm getting out of doing these things and getting to share them. It's it probably goes back to like somebody painting on a cave wall and going, look, I just did this thing on that hunt, and somebody hits them with a club.
Now, I haven't drawn or done any art making for a while, and I had to find a drawing of mine recently for someone, and it was that moment of, holy crap, I enjoyed doing this, and I made things that were kind of good over time. I really need to get back to this, along with 10,000 other things I need to get back to. But
Sure.
Favorite bug to draw?
Let's see. Well, the Beatles, I would say probably Ringo. But that is a very hard call because
Besides the Monarch, which I know you have
Monarch,
an
of
abiding
course,
love for.
I'm going to have an association with, although it's too much of the poster child, insect poster child. It's like, enough of that. Okay, fine. It's not enough products.
But the most fun.
But the Dung Beetle was pretty fun because it's sort of like the character was sort of this angry, put down.
Everybody makes fun of me because I'm the guy rolling dung.
I'm pushing shit around, And it's like, but you'd be dealing with the poop, and you should thank me. And Dung Beetle walks into the bar, asks the bartender, "Is this stool taken?"
Yeah. I'm glad you had the hint of that, and then the build up and the delivery a few pages later.
I'm glad you caught that.
Oh yeah, no, I was.
Did you happen to catch the QR codes?
I did. I haven't checked them out, but I think you showed me when we did the initial one here,
right.
and I've looked at.
No, I can tell, and this pleases me greatly because I've talked to so many people, including, by the way, the copy editor on my book, who is meticulous as all get out. I mean, he's really, it's remarkable what he's finding and checking on, and we back and forth on everything. And I said, well, something about the QR codes, and he was like, "What QR codes?" I mean, he's at the end of the book, and I'm like, "Well, this page, and this page," and it's just part of it is
they're integrated into the displays.
They're integrated, and also the book is dense enough where there's a little piece of poetry here, there's a quote from somebody, there's some drawing by somebody, and that it's just visually the QR code sort of gets buried as like that just is thrown in there, and it's not necessarily a real thing. Yeah,
and that's the thing. They're integrated into the art, and again, your panel designs and page designs are flowing. We'll say. I mean, you managed to really keep them rolling. So he never checked out the QRs.
Subsequently, and that was
I got to go click on each of these.
And then, so when I did the coloring Insectopolis, the coloring book, which is like a companion book, I put the QR codes front and they have their own page. Yeah. So there's no missing. That's another layer. But right now I'm doing I'm working on a show at the Society of Illustrators that'll open on May 22nd. And actually, it opens even earlier, but I'll be there.
But the opening,
for the big opening, and I'm kind of replicating the library show in a much smaller, different space, but even playing with like monarchs on every step going up to the second floor gallery where the New Yorker show is now, and on the ceiling, and we're painting the ceiling again, and just like that in that space. But what's going to be notably different is having the original art in there. Also giant vinyls. But then inset into some of that, the vinyl, you'll get to see the pen and ink drawing. And one of the things, the reason why I like these companion books is because all the coloring that happens digitally, I think we're in a world where so many people work digitally, and that you sort of get these sort of the magic impression of AI could have done that or whatever, and I really love the idea that showing people that there is actually a line drawing that was done, and then the color is
but all the process
overlaid on that. So there's process in there, and I'm always saying to students in class, like, a decent part of my living is selling original art, and more what I'm seeing is they're becoming like hen's teeth because nobody has originals. They only have prints. Yeah. And that by all means, keep on going digital. My work is becoming more valuable, but it's worth noting, and you might want to try to have a stage in your work be actually hand-drawn, and you might enjoy the physicality of it.
That was when I recorded with Craig Thompson last week, and he was, in his case, discussing the obsessive-compulsive nature of getting a second color and then realizing how many gradations of it he could overlay to try to get essentially different colors than just the red. And it was like, yes, in theory you could do that. I was sort of wondering how the book worked. He's like, I went a little crazy trying to get all these layers to emit exactly what he needed as a second color. Yeah. But that sense of
lots of danger with Photoshop and things you can do, and the beauty of it. I mean, one of the things I stumbled on that I'm really excited about was to not break the narrative in the book. The bibliography is the insects flying into
the gift room,
into the gift shop, and then, but that meant every single book cover was one that I scanned or photographed or
to be reproduced in its,
and then turned it, added a shadow on it, made the thing look like it was on a book, and there's like 50 or 60 books in there, and it's a beautiful thing to be able to do that, and at the same time, like really show
I'm killing
readers,
myself making this thing, but it puts it all there for them.
It was very involved, and you could do that with every stage of putting something in to make it look like it's in a case and tilting it and all that, skew, etc., and then putting a shadow over it, and then putting the text in there and trying to make it look like it's merged with, like it's in a case. Another cool thing that was happening from when I photographed the library and trying to figure out how things would go, and this type of thing that maybe if I had mapped out the book I wouldn't have stumbled on, but I got to the Nabokov chapter, and I'm trying to figure out, like, how am I going to do him? I'm looking up pictures of him, and it's like, the anatomy of him standing there, and
kind of slumpy,
whatever it's going to be. And I was looking in the room where they have his archive, and there was these statues, the busts, and one of them just looked sufficiently like him, and I'm like, oh, there we go.
Why not?
And it says Nabokov on this, I can just, I'll place that on the statue. So you want to know his birth and death dates? There it's always, if you're wondering who that is. And then I don't have to deal with legs. He's got arms if I want to give it to him.
Yeah.
And he floats around. And then in that process, again, another stumble on was the discovery that Osamu Tezuka was a super insect fan. And that in fact, he called himself Osamu Mushi Tezuka and named his studio Mushi, and Mushi means insect in Japanese. And so, things like that. And right around the time I was coming up on looking into his story, I was in Mexico, and at the English language library, they had a copy of Understanding Comics among their very small library of graphic novels. Yeah. And I've read it 3 or 4 times, and I was like, picked it up just for never hurts.
As long as I'm here.
Yeah. And there's a whole thing on Osamu Tezuka and on the storytelling differences between Eastern and Western. Yeah.
All the panel transitions and the way things are done in time.
Right to left, all that. And I'm like, oh yeah, that's the answer to this. Yeah. How I'm going to, how I'm going to tell his story. And then finding the Tezuka Museum that is amazing, has like a tiled floor with Astro Boy on it. Or no, actually it's his face, his cartoonish character, and all these things. And they're like, oh, I get that reference. And then, so it just so many things unfolded as I just, that I would not have plotted. Yeah. Because, I would have been doing all that research and then it
has to be this way, and this is what happens on page 56.
And it's hard to get unstuck from, when you start to do the work, then you're like, oh, do I have to give that up? So I still work in really tiny thumbnails where I can change my mind about things. So I headed off in a direction with doing Alexander von Humboldt's story. Yeah. And it was like panel to panel, and I just was bored even in the thumbnails. Mm-hmm. And then I thought, I was drawing in my sketchbook, and I was working on that in Mexico. He's very popular in Mexico, and he's one of the guys that was hugely popular in the world. I mean, one of the most famous people in the world, like right next to Napoleon. He was so well known. There was marches, 10,000 people marched for him for his funeral in New York City. And around the world, and then he was just virtually forgotten because he was German, and during World War I, we just sort of said
enemy aliens. Yeah.
But I was drawing in my sketchbook and doing these sort of like splashes across pages, and I'm like, what if I just do it like a sketchbook thing, and I'll have it be his face, and the comic will be inside of his brain, and you'll see whatever that kind of thing that just were unfolding that I would not have plotted if I went formal.
And again, it feels very unself-conscious. It's different than your adaptations, certainly. Those being the last 2 things we've sat down to talk about, Kafka and Joseph Conrad. So yeah, I'm really hoping that this provides you with another another mode, that leaves you more open, whether it's going to be a sort of nonfiction project like this, or even if it's either adaptation or there's always original work. You could always be looking at your own stories.
I have, original work is that's the most likely direction I will go, because this sort of falls in between, with all the research.
Yeah.
But I love autobiographical comics. Actually, a story that I'm inclined to get to eventually is meeting Robert Crumb and Harvey Keitel when I was 12 and 13 and in Cleveland, and that it's just a hilarious, ridiculous story and would make a good comic.
Yes, you didn't make it into Dan Adell's biography of Crumb, but
I noted. I just got to the place where that's right exactly.
I was there.
Happens. Yeah. Well, he had to juggle a lot.
As we talked about, that the book could have been 800 pages instead of 400, and so he understood it. But the big question you always know is coming: what have you been reading?
Well, I read. I was reading insect books nonstop.
Yeah.
My absolute, just completely knocked out by Richard Powers' Playground.
Yeah.
That's the best thing I've read recently. I read a fair amount of Donald Westlake and
Richard Parker, the Stark novels.
Yeah, the Stark novels, and that that's my favorite easy reading.
Yeah.
And then I'm reading the Crumb book right now. So I usually am juggling between a couple of different things, and I'll periodically pick up a graphic novel. But Richard Powers, I had not read him before Playground, and that just came out pretty recently.
Yeah. And I used to read him in the 90s, and I sort of fell off in the 2000s. I know I've got to go back.
I could not recommend this book more highly.
Yeah, I heard the Overstory is also
The Overstory
fantastic.
is the one that is always being referenced, author of the Overstory. I'm like, okay, I'm going to read that for sure. I actually started in on another one of his books when I was in Mexico, but I was borrowed from the library there, and I was like, got to return it before I go. In fact, it was the Overstory.
I figured next time we get together, we will talk about how your trips to Mexico may have changed in recent light, and just how the vibe is different. So keep that in your head, because that's what we're going to sit down and along with your head stuff.
Yeah, there's much to talk about if you want to just go off on it.
Yeah, we're going to have a bit of a tangent after that.
With the Wish We Weren't Here.
Yeah, I think that's going to be a perfect time. You're one of those guys who I'll record with twice in a year, which we did back in 2019 for the Conrad and Kafka. But it's always great to sit down and talk with you, Peter. So thanks for coming back on.
Thanks.
And that was Peter Kuper. Go check out Insectopolis. It's out now from W.W. Norton. Also, check out Coloring Insectopolis and Monarch's Journey, the two coloring albums that accompany this one. Oh, and this fall, Peter's got that collection of his Charlie Hebdo comics coming out from Fantagraphics, Wish You Weren't Here. So if you are a time traveler listening to this in the distant future, check that out too. You can find out more about Peter's work at his site, peterkuper.com, and that's peterkuper.com. That's got links to his comics, his books, his prints, blog, events that he's done, press, etc. Oh, and you can also follow Peter on Instagram at Kuper Art, all one word, and on Blue Sky as P. Kuper. Our music for this episode is Fella by Hal Mayforth, used with permission from the artist. You should visit my archives to check out my episode with Hal from the summer of 2018 and learn more about his art and painting. And you can listen to his music at soundcloud.com/Mayforth. And that's MAY4TH. And that's it for this week's episode of the Virtual Memories Show. Thanks so much for listening. We'll be back next week with another great conversation. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show and download past episodes at the iTunes Store. You can also find all our episodes and get on our email list at either of our websites, vmspod.com or chimeraobscura.com/VM. You can also follow the Virtual Memories Show on Twitter and Instagram at vmspod, at virtualmemoriespodcast.tumblr.com, and on YouTube, Spotify, and TuneIn.com by searching for Virtual Memories Show. And if you like this podcast, please tell your pals, talk it up on social media, and go to iTunes, look up the Virtual Memories Show, and leave a rating and maybe a review for us. It all goes to helping us build a bigger audience. Now, you've been listening to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth. Keep reading, keep making art, and keep the conversation going.